There is a plant alive today that drinks the dead, not in metaphor, not in the language of poetry or myth. Literally, it constructed a vessel from its own body, filled it with fluid it produces itself, and has been dissolving creatures whole for millions of years. Before the first human being stood upright on this earth, this plant had already perfected the art of the kill. We do not talk about it. And the reason we do not talk about it is not ignorance. It is something closer to discomfort, because this plant did not evolve to serve us. It did not evolve to feed us, or heal us, or shelter us. It evolved entirely outside of human need, and in a world built on the assumption that nature exists for our use. Something that exists entirely for itself becomes difficult to categorize. It becomes, in the language of modern systems, unmanageable. This is Ancient Food Files. Before you continue watching, please check the link I provided in this video's description. That way, you can verify it yourself. We document what has been buried, not always by malice, but by the quiet erasure that comes when knowledge does not fit the architecture of profit. If you are watching this for the first time, consider subscribing, not because we ask for it, but because what is preserved here will not be found on the shelves of any institution that depends on your forgetting. Now, let us open the archive. The island of Borneo, one of the oldest landmasses on Earth. Its interior highlands have been largely undisturbed for tens of millions of years. The Kadazan Dusun people of Sabah, who have lived along its mountain slopes for generations beyond counting, knew this plant not as a curiosity but as a presence. They called it Perak Kara, the monkey cup, not because monkeys drank from it casually, but because they had watched, across generations, what happened to things that lingered too long at its rim. The oral traditions of Borneo's highland peoples did not separate this plant from the forest's moral order. It was understood as a receiver, a place where the dead were converted back into the living. The fluid inside its pitcher was not seen as poison. It was seen as transformation. That understanding is more scientifically precise than anything written about it for the first 300 years of Western documentation. Nepenthes raja grows only here, on the ultramafic slopes of Mount Kinabalu and Mount Tambayukan in Sabah, Malaysian Borneo, at elevations between 1,500 and 2,650 meters. The soil beneath it is almost aggressively hostile to life, rich in heavy metals, poor in nitrogen, drained and leached by constant equatorial rain. Most plants retreat from soil like this. This one chose it deliberately, or rather, over millions of years of pressure. It was shaped by it. The pitcher itself is not a flower, it is a leaf. Specifically, it is a tendril that grows from the tip of a leaf and over time inflates, hardens, and opens into a vessel that can hold 3.5 liters of digestive fluid. The largest confirmed pitchers have measured 41 centimeters in length, wide enough to drown a rat, and it has. Documented cases exist of N. Raja pitchers containing drowned rats, frogs, lizards, and insects in various stages of dissolution. The rim of the pitcher, the peristome, is engineered, not designed, engineered by time. Its waxy, ribbed surface becomes frictionless when wet. An insect landing on it in humid conditions finds no purchase. The fall is instant. The fluid below is viscoelastic. It is not simply acidic water. It contains digestive enzymes, wetting agents that prevent escape, and in some specimens, compounds that accelerate decomposition. A cockroach dropped into a mature pitcher dissolves within days. Only the exoskeleton remains. And eventually, not even that. Western science first formally described Nepenthes raja in 1859. The botanist Joseph Dalton Hooker, working from specimens collected by Hugh Lowe on the slopes of Kinabalu, named it Raja, king, because he had no other language sufficient for what he was looking at. Hooker was not a man given to sentiment. He had catalogued thousands of specimens across decades of fieldwork, but his notes on Raja describe something he called, without elaboration, disturbing in its perfection. The mid-19th century was not a time of conservation. It was a time of collection. Specimens of N. Raja were extracted from Borneo's highlands and transported to botanical gardens in Kew, Brussels, and Amsterdam. The mortality rate in transit was extraordinary. The plant refused most conditions that were not its own. Attempts to cultivate it at lower elevations repeatedly failed. It would grow, slowly, grudgingly, and it would refuse to pitcher properly, producing stunted, fluid-less cups that dissolved nothing. It was, in the language of Victorian horticulture, incooperative, and so began a quiet erasure, not by decree, not by burning, but by the slow machinery of institutional indifference. A plant that could not be easily transported, could not be cultivated commercially, could not be scaled, and produced nothing edible or medicinal in a form that colonial economies could process became, effectively, inconvenient. The knowledge the Kadazan Dusun held about its behavior, its seasonal rhythms, its relationship to the forest around it, that knowledge was recorded by no one. It existed in oral tradition, and oral tradition was not, in the taxonomy of the 19th century, considered a source. The deforestation of Borneo's lowlands began accelerating in the 20th century. By the 1980s, logging concessions had consumed millions of hectares. Raja's highland habitat was not the primary target, it grew too high, on terrain too difficult for industrial extraction. But the forest beneath it, the ecological matrix that regulated humidity and cloud cover and rainfall, began to fracture, and the plant, which had survived every geological convulsion for millions of years, found itself facing something it had not evolved to answer: the systematic dismantling of the conditions that made its existence possible. It was not killed, it was simply made increasingly impossible. Modern ecology has done what Victorian botany could not. Researchers working in Sabah over the past 3 decades have documented something the Kadazan Dusun already knew. Raja does not merely consume, it participates. Its pitchers function as micro-ecosystems. Certain species of mosquito larvae live only inside Raja pitchers. A species of crab spider, Masumanops nepenthicola, hunts at the pitcher's rim, and its droppings fall inside, supplementing the plant's nitrogen intake. The Bornean tree shrew, Tupaia montana, has been filmed feeding on nectar secreted by the pitcher's lid, defecating directly into the fluid below. The plant feeds the shrew feeds the plant. This arrangement has existed, researchers estimate, for millions of years. It is not predation alone, it is architecture. The plant did not simply become a hunter, it became a system. There is a particular kind of forgetting that is not accidental. When a knowledge system is not written down, it does not simply disappear through neglect. It is made to disappear through the replacement of oral culture with institutional culture, through the reclassification of indigenous understanding as anecdote rather than data, through the slow erosion of the language in which that knowledge was held. The Kadazan Dusun understanding of permaculture, its place in the mountain ecosystem, its seasonal behavior, the way its pitcher fluid changed composition across the year, exists now in fragments, recorded partially by researchers who arrived decades too late and spoke imperfectly the language they needed. What was known is not entirely gone, but it has been made difficult to access, and difficulty, sustained long enough, becomes indistinguishable from loss. The highland forests of Borneo are changing, cloud patterns are shifting, the moss forests that regulate moisture at elevation are drying at their edges. Nepenthes Raja is listed as endangered, not critically, not yet, but the word endangered contains within it a specific kind of patience, the patience of a process already in motion, moving at a speed too slow for alarm but too fast for comfort. And yet, on the wet ultramafic slopes of Kinabalu, in the places where the soil is still wrong for everything else, it continues. The pitchers fill with rain and enzyme. The tree shrews come in the morning. The mosquito larvae hatch inside fluid that exists nowhere else on Earth. The plant does not require our attention. It does not require our intervention. It requires only that we stop reducing the conditions that allow it to exist. That is a different kind of ask, a harder one. There is a temptation, when looking at something this old and this complete, to search for a lesson, to extract meaning in the way the pitcher extracts nitrogen, efficiently, without waste. But Nepenthes Raja does not offer lessons. It offers itself, exactly as it is, to a world that has spent 2 centuries trying to classify it into usefulness. It was never lost. It was never waiting to be rediscovered. It was on the mountain when the first botanist arrived with his collecting jars. It was on the mountain when the logging began in the valleys below. It is on the mountain now, filling and digesting and enduring, in the particular silence of things that do not need permission to persist. The knowledge of it was buried. The plant itself simply continued. Nature does not archive itself for our convenience, but we can choose to pay attention. If what you have heard here matters to you, subscribe to Ancient Food Files, not as a gesture toward an algorithm, but because attention, given consistently and over time, is the only form of preservation that cannot be deforested.